Okay, so I'm going to mute now. And Lyn, would you tell us about the most profound session you ever did?
Well, when you've been doing this 40 hours a week and more in a military setting, that's kind of hard to pick. For 8.5 years, yeah, it's kind of hard to pick. But probably the most exciting one I had um, was when they asked me to actually get into a an advanced particle beam weapon and describe what was going on inside the beam. And it was sort of known as a death ray. But uh, I got to the session, I got into it, climbed basically into the beam, and it was the most beautiful experience I've ever had in my life. I can't really describe it. It was my senses were so overpowered that all the colors were deeper colors than I've ever seen before. Time itself seemed to be distorted. I could look up and down the beam and see myself at different times, um, and the emotions and the feeling of it were just more than I've ever felt before. And finally, I remembered what I was there to do, and I got the descriptors of what was going on inside the beam, and that was all that went into the report as far as I know. But the experience of it for me was just uh, an astounding experience, more astounding than anything I've ever felt before.
That is a very cool story, and as couple people mentioned, they loved that story from your book, and hearing it from right straight from you live is really, really a terrific thing. I had trouble picking what was my most exciting one as well. I did have a part time, but I think one of the most exciting ones was a kidnapping case that I worked on, and I worked on this kidnapping case for a number of months, and I had such a profound experience in working on it because we were like right behind the kidnappers. The investigators would jump on. I was myself and one other person doing this, and right as we jumped in to, they would run there, they would find everything we told them that was there. They could tell that the kidnappers were just like one step ahead, and now I believe it's because there was somebody on the investigative team that was probably cluing in the kidnappers, because they would always get there just right after the kidnappers left. But one of the things that was most exciting about it was that I really connected with a guard that was guarding the kidnappers, who actually told me the name of the organization that did the kidnapping, which the investigators had not heard of before, but when they looked it up, it did exist, and it existed right in the area of the kidnapping. He also explained to me the whole ideology of this group, where I had one of those experiences where you become so one, with the mind of someone, that suddenly that ideology makes sense. And you're like, am I on the wrong side of this thing? And then you're like, oops, I think I need to detox. and and, uh, and so it was really an amazing, amazing, and very exciting and dynamic experience. Also, I just want to remind everybody, today is not a Q&A, so please don't post your questions for now. We are going to have a Q&A soon, but today we have a set of questions that we're going to talk about. So today's not actually Q&A. Now, if the question is about what Lyn was just sharing about the particle beam, I think that's pretty interesting. And Morrow is one of my students, Lyn, and he's asking, what was your physical self and the perception of physical reality so strongly? Oh, why? Why was your physical self and the perception of physical reality so strongly affected by the beam if you don't actually go anywhere in CRV. And what we're talking about the whole idea of a virtual reality, how a lot of times in CRV, we're creating kind of a virtual reality and viewing a copy of the target. And so that's actually related to what you were saying. And so I just wanted to go back to that. I'm going to go ahead and mute again, and you can share the answer to that.
Okay, well, it's the same thing as though, you can bruise a person by hypnotizing them to be bruised. And, the physical bruise will happen. And no, mentally, I felt these physical effects. Now, my physical body sitting back in Fort Meade, didn't get blasted apart by particle beam weapons and all that. But the perception of the physical effects was what I was feeling.
Okay, so along those lines, if we're viewing a virtual reality, if we're like you say, okay, there's a man-made at the target, and this man-made is tall and cylindrical and shiny and metallic, and you get all these descriptors, and it's almost like you're building this thing in front of you, let's say. And then as you keep getting more information and you kind of are building this around you, then how does that cause things like you coming out of a session with a broken rib, or with your beautiful blue eyes turning black? I got to ask that. That's my question.
Well, that can happen with the eyes. Eyes can change colors, especially blue eyes can. But my theory on the broken rib was that when I was experiencing the person who went through the accident that broke his rib, I think that I tensed up to the point where I cracked mine. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I don't go for the woo woo all that much, so yeah, that's my belief of what happened.
Okay, well that's good. I always wondered that. Let's see. Then let's see. Well, when it comes, some people ask me questions about the kidnapping. And the thing with the kidnapping was that we eventually came to understand that the man who had been kidnapped, who was elderly, the last place they took him was like a pit in the ground, and with a chair that he was tied to. And he had tried to fight and escape, got beaten up really badly, and then got put into this very damp hole in the ground where he did pass away, sadly. But so it was kind of a fail in the sense that we didn't get to him in time. I do believe it is because this was in a foreign country where the police were very, very corrupt, and the kidnapper's family had hired their own people to be the investigators. It was a wealthy family. They hired this team, and I have a feeling there was someone on the team who was maybe a double, a two-sided person that was feeding energy to that. So that didn't have a happy ending, but it was extremely accurate. Got the name of the kidnappers, got the name of the town that the kidnappers were closest to, and that's kind of a neat story in that. When I was kind of having, and we're going to talk about bilocation, but I was having a bilocation experience, and we were viewing in real time. We were in Central Time, and the location that I was viewing was in Central Time, and it was a full moon. And so it was almost like I was this guard, and I was saying, "Where are you? What's the closest town?" And I didn't even realize I was pointing, and the guard was pointing and saying Socorro, and there was this little village called Socorro nearby, and it was a tiny village. I could see the lights in the dark. And then my monitor said, "Where is the moon in relation to you?" And I went, "Oh, it's right there." So I was pointing like this and pointing like this, and my monitor was able to kind of triangulate the position that I was pointing towards. Well, then we went on Google Earth to try to find Socorro. And it was a very tiny place. And on Google Earth, we couldn't find it, believe it or not. And then the next day, my monitor, who's also my wonderful husband, Jim, comes home and says, I found it. I found it. And I'm like, you found what? He said, I found Socorro. And I'm like, how did you find Socorro? And he said, I went to a specialty map shop and I got a really detailed map and I found Socorro on there. So then we were able to go on Google Earth using the coordinates we pulled off the map, and we found everything laid out exactly as I had sketched it, exactly as I described it. We were able to send the investigators there, and they got there literally probably within 30 minutes after the kidnappers had left, leaving a ton of evidence that they were there. So it was really a pretty exciting thing. And I asked I asked Jim, I said, "What made you go get this map?" And he said, "Well, if you said it was there, I knew it had to be there." So I went and got it. And I was thinking, now here's somebody who believes in me more than I believe in myself, because I would have never thought of going and getting a map. So that was kind of a neat thing. Did did you want to say something, Lynn? Okay, then we're ready for the next question. The next question is, what is the most profound session that you ever did? What do you feel like was really profound? Maybe even in a way that altered your perception of reality.
Oh, that last part that altered my perception of reality uh, was not the most profound. I think the most profound was when they uh, gave me, I was a blind target. I didn't know what I was doing and, what the target was. And, and I viewed this person, and this person was the most profound, the the most amazing person I ever viewed. And uh, I mean, just being in the presence of that person actually changed my life. Uh, and when I finished, the only, they had been giving me the bad guys, uh, Saddam Hussein and all these, to do basically uh, personality assessments or plans and intentions, which is a mind meld. And so they gave me this one because I had complained. I had complained. I said, these are wrecking me. Give me Bozo the Clown, do something, but not that. And so this one person was the most profound, wonderful person I'd ever met in my life. And so my entire summary for that session was, whatever evil you think this guy did, he didn't do it. This guy's innocent, And the monitor opened the envelope, and the director had listened to my complaint, and he had a slipped of paper in there and written on it, Jesus. And that meeting uh, was a bilocation, and that meeting changed my life, really did. That's probably the most profound I've ever had.
That is such a beautiful story. I've had so many students over the years who, I make reading your book a prerequisite. It's like, if you want to get ahead, you want to progress faster, read The Seventh Sense before you take this course. And so many of them have been like, God, I wish I could have that experience. I wish somebody would blind task me with Jesus. I've heard a lot of students say that. I think the most profound, really deeply profound session, and this was really hard to choose because I've actually had a number of sessions that really moved me profoundly. And one of them that the main one that really comes to mind is when I was tasked with Mars. And I was asked to kind of view these different parts of Mars through time and move backwards and forwards in time and things like that. But And that was, that wasn't so profound. That was just viewing a location. But for some reason, I came upon these obelisks on Mars and was asked to describe the purpose of the obelisks. And I said, well, they're for transmitting and receiving information. But when I moved to the top of the obelisks, and then was tasked with move to the source that is transmitting to the obelisks, that totally changed my target. I was no longer on Mars anymore. And then I had a really profound encounter with these blue amorphous beings. And I got to tell you guys a funny story that involves Lyn, because I really wanted to tell Lyn about this experience. But I was like, how do I tell Lyn this experience without sounding like I'm crazy? And so I started to tell him, and I said, we were at a class, and it was, the day was over, and the students were all leaving, everybody was leaving. But the minute they saw me sit down with Lyn to talk to him, everybody stopped, like they wanted to hear what was being said. And I was like, no, go ahead and go, everybody. And Lyn was like, no, they can stay, they can stay. So I start telling the story. And I said, we kind of just nicknamed these blue amorphous beings that showed up. We nicknamed them the lava lamp people. And Lyn looks at everybody and goes, okay, you guys can leave now. So I was like, okay, now he's really sure that I'm certifiable. But the interesting thing was that these beings were just like emitting love like you wouldn't believe. And afterwards, Mel Riley called me and was like, he had the same exact experience. He had been tasked with the same target. He and I both experienced every step of the thing was exactly identical. And it was very profound for him as well. We talked about it many, many times throughout our relationship before he passed away. And he was always like, I want to get in touch with those beings again. Well, interestingly, since then, I have tasked 5 advanced viewers with that target, and they all encountered the obelisks, and they all encountered these blue beings, and they all had this profound experience of love and concern for the planet and that sort of thing. So it was almost like they were transmitting a message of, love and concern. And it was just really, really a beautiful experience. That was definitely my most profound experience. Are you?
Yeah, Mars was the first bilocation that I ever had, and probably the one that changed my perception most when they sent me to the unit and they read me on and told me reading you on is when they tell you what they really do, not what they tell the public they do. And they read you on and you sign that if I tell any of this, it'll be $10,000 fine and 10 years in jail and all that, for treason. But they told me what they did for a unit. And I thought, I'm either on candid camera right now, with, this is a joke, or else I've been sent to the loony bin. and I had no belief whatever about it. And the first session they ever gave me, I think it was Bill Ray and Dawn, that nobody ever hears about. Dawn were sent out to a place, and gave them 15 minutes to get out there. I had no idea what it was, and I was supposed to describe where they are. And I just kept describing these 2 people driving along, looking out the window, driving along, looking out the window, and that was it. And finally, Skip Atwater, who was my monitor, said, okay, well, you missed the target, but you did, and he gave me some niceties and all that. And but basically said I failed, And so Bill and Dawn came back. And Dawn came in and said, we drove and drove and drove and never did find the place that we were supposed to go. And I thought, oh crap, this stuff works. And that was a change in perception, of reality right there.
That is really a cool story. Tell them the one about the donuts. The donut shop.
Oh, the donut shop. That was actually, that happened to Paul before I got there. it also happened to me. There was a target. We were out at SRI, and I did a target, and I got the smell of donuts and all that along these rows of equipment and tools hanging off of shelves and all that. And so anyway, we went out afterwards. The target was the rows of tools. It was just the inside of a hardware store was the target. On the way back, we stopped for donuts and went in and had donuts and coffee, and that's when they explained to me that you can pollute a person's session that's already been done after the person has finished that session by messing up the feedback. Beginning viewers tend to view their feedback and not the target. And I was a beginning viewer at the time. And so I viewed my future feedback, which was a hardware store, and sitting there eating donuts. And so, yeah. But we were not above the, putting to use the fact that we could mess up other people's sessions. Not each other, but our enemies were doing remote viewing too. So, and we could mess up sessions.
That's, yeah. Interestingly, when you talk about, like, I just finished teaching the 3-day ARV workshop. And one of the things that blows people's minds, especially people who are coming into this really green or never having had any kind of experience, is the whole idea of retrocausality, affecting things in the past, the idea of being able to improve or affect your past through time loops and your whole experiences along those lines, which is so amazing. And so that's always a mind-blowing thing to talk about, but that's exactly a great example of that, that your whole experience in the donut shop is kind of retrocausality, messing up other people's sessions after the fact by screwing with the feedback it's kind of influencing the past in a way, like a circular thing. So that's pretty interesting. You want to comment on that, Lyn?
Yeah, well, I did a 4-year study on this, keeping data, because I'm a data freak. And the first year, I kept track of every decision I made and the result of it, and came up with like barely over 50% good decisions. The rest were bad to, neutral to bad. And that rate of decision making will not get you rich or famous or anything like that. And so the second year, I still kept track of my decisions, but when I got the feedback, I sat down and accessed myself at the moment of that decision, and then tried to put hindsight in using a tool that's more advanced, where you can put something in somebody else's mind. And so I tried accessing myself at the moment of decision. And of course, it didn't change anything. Okay. But it influenced those decisions. And over that year, I started making better and better decisions, because when I made a decision, I became more sensitive to feedback from the future. And at the end of that second year, I think I was something like 68% good decisions. I tried it another year and it went up to around 85% good decisions, no bad decisions at all. And so the fourth year, I have never gone back to influence anything on the fourth year. And the fourth year, it dropped back down to barely above 50%. So you cannot change the past, but you can influence it for a better future.
Yeah, Freddie says that's worth writing an article about, Lyn. And Dax says, this happened to me with a Lori target, then in real life, time loop. I was where I last viewed and got perceptions I didn't realize I'd had. Trippy. Trippy. Yes, folks, for those of you who are asking about the replay, this will be in the replay will be in two places. It will be on the Remote Viewing with Lori Williams Facebook group, and it will also be for Club PRV members. It will be in the forum. And then we'll share a link with Lyn too, and Lyn can put it out to his groups in whatever way he wants to too, because we'll share a link so that Lyn can share it too. And okay, so this is yeah, so retro causality, that is a fascinating thing. Lyn, when it comes, and I know that you and I are going to be doing a joint presentation, Lord willing and the creek don't rise, we're going to be doing a joint presentation with Irva, and our paperwork is due tomorrow. I haven't gotten it in yet. Did you get that email about with the questions and stuff? Yeah, I have to get mine in. But anyway, we're going to be doing a joint presentation on how to ask the right questions, and how do you frame things. So, because if you don't frame things right and you don't ask the right question, you're not going to get a good answer, a good, clear answer. So Morrow asked, what's the tasking you gave yourself to get that to happen? I mean, when you're doing the retro causality, and I get this question a lot, like what's the best way to task yourself on something like that, where you're going to be doing this continual influencing of the past?
There is a fallacy that everybody believes that you can't work polluted, okay? And I try to be extremely cautious about students, beginners, and all that. Never pollute them, because their logic mind takes over. But as you get more advanced, I know in my training and in our training in the military, we would teach people to, and I now teach my more advanced students how to work in spite of pollution. So I give them pollution with, instead of front loading, I just give them pollution and have them work through it, because I give them pollution that will be misleading. And then they have to work through it to get to the target. And so a trained viewer can work in spite of pollution. And therefore, when I did this, I was looking at the decision I made, because I'd made a record of it. And at the time I made it, and I gave myself the tasking of access myself at this time on that date, and then I started working the session. And in doing it that way, I did a session that just zeroed in on me and that decision, without describing buildings and the time, the day, and all this other stuff. It just narrowed me to zero in on it. And I had learned to work in spite of pollution. And so therefore, it was actually very easy tasking, very easy to do.
Yes, it is. It actually is. And that's the thing too, is I think, well, I'm laughing, remembering once when you were getting ready to do a dog and pony show in a class, for the students. And you looked up, you were getting everything, your paper and your pen and everything. And you looked up and then looked at everybody and you said, all the years I've been doing this, and I still every now and then have this thought, like, what am I doing? This is impossible. How can I be viewing something that's hidden from me? But what's so funny is it's kind of like the bumblebee who doesn't realize that aerodynamically he should not be able to fly. when we just let go of those perceptions and those belief systems of we can't, this is impossible, we can't do this, then it is very easy. It actually becomes a thing that's not difficult at all when once you let go of the thought that it's, you know, we're doing something that's absolutely impossible. So anyway, I love it that you said it really wasn't hard at all. I also work with my advanced and operational students on pollution, and one of the hardest things to do is to view for yourself, because you are polluted and you know what you're viewing, and a lot of times you might be really emotionally invested. And I think a lot of us, you know, a lot of remote viewers don't realize how strongly emotions really can affect your sessions. So a lot of times it's not the fact that you're remote viewing for yourself, it's the fact that you're really emotionally involved. Like, you know, is that scumbag my daughter's dating, a felon or doing drugs, or, you know, something like that. There's a lot of emotion vested in that. It can really ruin the session and keep you from being able to view it in an unbiased way. And so we are kind of working up to that. Of course, there are ways to blind yourself to the target so that you can try to view something for yourself and not be, you know, connected to it. But there's a lot of problems with that as well. So to me, the exercise of viewing something for yourself is one of the best exercises in dealing with pollution, because it can be, you know, you can get the feedback if you set it up properly. You can get the feedback, and, you know, as it comes rolling towards you in the future, and you can see for yourself if you were right or wrong.
Well, one of the things about dealing with actual customers is that you come in and they tell you all this information, what they think it is, and you talk about pollution. And, okay, there's a missing child, and the police tell you everything about the case. What are you going to do? Say, I'm sorry, you told me what the target is. I can't work that and go home. No, you're going to stay and work it. But dealing with customers, what you realize is they wouldn't ask you to be there if they knew the answer. And so always zero in on the unknown. And that's the first rule of working polluted. Go for the unknown. And and usually the unknown is unknown because their theories and their ideas and all that are totally wrong. And so once you learn that, you learn to just blow all that stuff off, go for the unknown, find the answer, and give them the answer. If they don't like the answer, they'll throw it in the trash, and you've done your job. And then they'll come back later and say, oh, you were right, and we didn't listen. Say, I told you so.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Somebody asked about, after I worked on that kidnapping case, which, you know, in which we failed to save this man, how the family of the man felt about it. We stayed friends with them for such a long time. They really, I mean, we were in touch with them all throughout the project, and so they knew we were really doing our best to provide, you know, the best information. They knew something was wrong, and they were very, very grateful. They never were upset with us or anything. They were very grateful, and they were also quite amazed with how, you know, how that whole thing went. They were very amazed. They knew that it was, you know, there was a lot to it and that it was real. Are you ready for another question? Shall we jump into another one? Okay, the next question is, where did the questions go? Sorry, I've got to pull up my little notes here because I had switched them. Here we go. Okay, the next question was, tell us about a bilocation experience you've had.
Bilocate. Okay, Ingo Swann defined bilocation as your mind being in two places at once. So you're conscious of the target fully, and you're conscious of the table where you're sitting and your pages and all that fully at the same time. That's uh, that's rare, that you can get that much contact and remain totally in contact with your surroundings, with your real surroundings. What you happen to do usually, and this is what's called perfect site location, or it's what most people think of as real full bilocation, is your all of your senses get so attuned to the target that you can't tell you're not there, and it becomes as real to you as your real surroundings, to the point where you don't even see your real surroundings anymore. And this is even more rare. And over the years, it's happened to me, I think, about 11 times. The first one was Mars. And in that session, I didn't know the target was Mars. It was a practice target. And all of a sudden, I found myself standing there with these beings, and they had me describe them. Excuse me, and we were in an enclosed place like a cave or something, and there were some steps going up. And so the monitor said, go up the steps and see. Went up the steps and found myself in a hallway that had sand all over the floor. I was barefoot because I take my shoes off when I view. But I walked in this sand up to an entrance, to a doorway that faced to the outside, and I leaned out. There was no porch or anything like that. There was just the edge of the building that was sloped, and I looked out and I saw these sort of really weathered mountain-looking things, hill-looking things around. The sky was not a real blue. It was really strange colored. The sun was very dim, but the sun was out. The wind was extremely cold on my face and all that. And all of a sudden, I thought, where am I? And I was back at the table, just like that. And I mean, that realization shocked me out of it. And the target was a pyramid on Mars. And there was another one later on that was after I had learned to kind of control you get sucked into the target, so it goes past the bilocation. There was another where it was also a practice target, and I found myself standing on a street corner looking across, and there was a big building and it says Swiss Bank. And there was this Volkswagen parked in front of it that was a Volkswagen convertible. This man and his son came out and got into the car. And so I ran across the street, jumped into the back seat, and sat up on the part that was the collapsed convertible top. And he started home, I guess. And as he did, I was looking at street names popping out of the sucked in situation and writing down the street names and going back in, and also drawing a map of where he was driving. He drove down this street past this park that had this well. I popped out and drew the well, went on down, and there was a railroad station, and he turned to the left, and I described that. And by that time, we ended the session and took the envelope out, and it was this tiny little town up in the Swiss Alps. And so we went to the National Geographic, got a map, and got a map of that town, And sure enough, the street names, I missed one street name, but I got these street names. There was a picture of the fountain that was in that park. And down at the end of that street was the railroad station where he had to turn left and all that. So that was probably the most accurate and the most pure, sucked in, perfect site integration that I ever had. But bilocation, Ingo's definition, is where you have that access to the site, but you also have access to the table so that you can write down what you're getting.
Yeah. Okay, so one thing that I found in my own bilocation, and I love it how you really distinguished those two experiences, the perfect site immersion experience or PSI experience versus true bilocation. And I love how you explained how Ingo said bilocation, you're kind of in both places at once mentally, because I've had a lot of those where I was able to, with some difficulty, to continue documenting, usually with prodding from Jim, could you write that down? Could you tell me what's happening? That kind of thing. But at the same time, really immersed in the target. And that's the way it was when I was on that kidnapping thing. But I did have a true PSI experience several times where I totally lost awareness of my location and had a true physical response to the target. One was that Mars target. When I first arrived there, I guess you could say, when I first had the PSI experience, which is very different from an OBE or an out of body experience, and we can maybe discuss that in a minute, but because I can see a lot of people are confused, like, how is that not an OBE? But it's definitely not an OBE. But at the same time, because I've had a lot of OBEs and it's very different, but I was viewing in a room that was so hot and I was having hot flashes. I was at that time in my life. But when I suddenly had this PSI experience on Mars, I was freezing and my lips turned blue. My teeth were chattering. Jim ran and got a blanket and wrapped me up because I had a very physical response to this target. Another time when really one of the strongest bilocations I ever had, I was sitting in a room with a young lady who wanted me to do a session, and I refused to let her tell me anything about what she wanted, so I would be totally blind. And just sitting there working the session with her sitting in front of me, I suddenly found myself sitting in a bar. And I know that it's probably hard to believe, but I'm not much of a bar fly. And I haven't been in a lot of bars in my life, but I was sitting in a bar. It was really dark. I could feel the coolness and the smoothness of the counter under my hands. Off to my right, I could see beer signs, neon beer signs. I knew right where the bartender was. I could hear clinking of glasses and the chattering and the music, and the cigarette smoke, which I'm allergic to, was overwhelming. And then right next to me on the stool was this little lady, and she was really wrinkled and very thin and very tiny. And she had that kind of maroon dyed hair, that some people have, really short maroon hair. And she was chain smoking, and throwing back whiskey or some kind of really strong liquor. And she turned to me and just like instantly communicated to me that she was not murdered, but she died of her own choices. Her own life choices killed her, that created health issues. So suddenly I'm back. And it was really the cigarette smoke that brought me back, because I suddenly wanted just to cough and run out of the room, and I jerked, and I'm back. And the whole experience was probably 3 seconds, maybe 10 seconds at most. It couldn't have been very long. And I looked at this woman and I said, did your mother smoke? Trying to be delicate. She's like, yeah, like 3 packs a day. I was like, did she like to drink? She's like, yeah. I said, did she hang out in bars? She said, every day, all day, bars. And I was just like, oh. And I said, she wants you to know that she wasn't murdered, but that she died of her lifestyle choices. And she goes, oh, thank you. She said, you wouldn't let me tell you why I was here, but that's why I came, because I was afraid maybe her boyfriend had killed her. But the doctors all told me no, she died of natural causes. So it's funny how they can call that natural causes when you smoke or drink yourself to death. That's still considered a natural cause. I guess anything other than murder might be a natural cause. I don't know. But Anyway, so that though, I was so blown away by how completely real and how I completely lost touch with anything in the room. I mean, I wasn't there. But when I've had OBEs, I was very aware of leaving my body and physically being somewhere else. Where this one was just, it just felt, it just has a very different feeling. It's really hard to put into words, the difference. But I've had OBEs frequently all throughout my life. And my earliest memories are OBEs. And I remember being a little kid in my little toddler bed and coming out of my body and doing somersaults into my closet and somersaults back out and somersaults in and somersaults back out. And funny thing is, several of my children also have the knack for having OBEs. And my son once said, "Hey, Mom, last night I climbed out of my body and I jumped up on the balcony and jumped off into the living room," because we had a house that had a inner balcony into the living room. And he goes, I was somersaulting off the balcony and going down to the living room and going back up. And also, when you're having an OBE, it's almost like you're a ghost. There is a physical part of you that's leaving your body, and you can like go through walls and things like that. And you're very consciously making decisions, about, well, here, I'm going to go here. And then the minute you think I'm going to go here, you're there. And it's just very, very strange. But you can't feel things. You can't touch and feel the smoothness of the table or smell the cigarette smoke. It's almost like you're disconnected from your senses. You're out of your body. You can see things and perceive things, but you're not, and you're flying and you're going through walls and things. Whereas this PSI experience, it was like I was remote viewing it, but I could feel the smoothness and the coldness of the bar in front of me. I could smell the cigarette smoke and it was choking me and things like that. Whereas OBEs, I never had that kind of experience. I knew I was out of my body and I was traveling around and seeing things, but I wasn't actually sensing in that way.
Yeah, and with the perfect side integration, you try to walk through a wall, you'll just bump your face. You know, it's a virtual reality with stress on the word reality. Yeah.
That's an excellent thing. Yeah, you would just bump into the wall exactly when you're having perfect sight immersion, because it's almost, you experience as if you were there physically, but you are not. So if you were physically there, you wouldn't be able to walk through a wall or fly or do any of those things. So that's that's very cool. You ready for another question? Okay. The next one is, if you were to look at your whole career as a remote viewer, all these years, I mean, how many years do you start out by telling me how many years total you have? I know it was in the 80s.
I got there in 84. So that is 16 plus 21, 37 years. Yeah. Man, I'm old.
So in your career, what would you say is if you were to look back over your whole career and think about who you were before you got to the unit in 1984, your belief systems and who you were, versus what you've learned from all these years and all these sessions you've done. I don't mean you to tell us everything you've learned. I just mean, how has your perception of reality changed, or your belief systems, or how has being a remote viewer fundamentally changed you?
Well, first of all, one of the things you learn about remote viewing is that everything you've ever learned about time is fake news, to coin a phrase, is not true, and that time is totally different. Time is a part of space, and the space-time continuum, and they're bound together, totally related, and you learn from that everything you learn about space, about the physical world, is also not really true either. Uh, so that I think the biggest thing that ever affected my life as a session was meeting Jesus. Uh, but there was another one where I was tasked with meeting God. I don't usually talk about that. Uh, it was a thing I went and with a request, and just to cut the whole thing short, but basically God said, I will give to you what I can give through you. And it let me know that, you know, uh, you ask God for something, you've got an obligation too. And this was many years after the session of meeting Jesus. But anyway, that changed my life. It really did. And, but my changing my perceptions, uh, I think it was a gradual thing. Just over the years, doing one session after another, analyzing what I did and what I experienced and all that, because I always do. I never just take a session, throw it on the shelf or in the wall, you know, or in the trash. Uh, uh, I go back and analyze the session because that's where you learn. You know, that's where you learn about yourself. And so I think just over the years, my perception of time, space, um, life, reincarnation, uh, death, um, the many different types of after death experiences and all that. Thanks to Ed Dames giving me all those where I had to access a person during and after death. Uh, uh, I just over time I don't know, I can't point to any one time. It was a growth.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. I love what you shared. I think I might want to ask you questions later when we're alone about this viewing of God. I always had a sense whenever I would be with you in a med apps class and you would talk about that one level of the building, you know, where you can meet God. Do you remember talking about that? Can you hear me okay? Are you able to hear me? Okay, yeah. Oh,
Say it again. I'm sorry.
I was saying that when you every time I've been with you during a med apps class and you've talked about that level of the building where you meet your God, so to speak, I've always been like, I think we need to have a more profound conversation about this. But yeah,
For those who don't know what she's talking about, in the medical applications, there is a tool that we use to access another person at their subconscious level. And this tool is an analogy, it's a scenario, and it has the name of the modern office building. And it takes hours to explain, and it takes months or years to actually perfect and to get good at. Uh, and very few do, but that's what she's talking about. Yeah.
um, yeah, okay, you can hear me. Yeah, so when it comes to how I've changed, I've really changed profoundly because of my journey, and Lynn knows better than anyone. And sometimes when I think about God and how God kind of we can just look back and just see, Jim and I were talking about this morning, how looking back, on the road behind you, so to speak, we can just see how so many events fell into place to bring us to where we are now, and we can see the wisdom in it and how it all fell together and why, and some of the miracles that happened along the way. And I could see the wisdom in how I was led to Lynn, because at the time that I discovered remote viewing, I could have found Dave Morehouse or Paul Smith or even Courtney Brown, who was just getting started at that point, just beginning. And, I could have ended up with anybody, but I ended up with Lyn. And I'm so grateful because I was coming straight off of the mission field, pretty recently. And all of this seemed scary to me. And and kind of like it's like crawling out on the ice, afraid that it's going to break any minute. And Lyn was uh, the perfect gentle teacher who also totally could relate to all my religious beliefs and all those things that I was carrying with me at that time. I did a session on the Kinross incident many years ago. I think it was probably like 2004. I, it was an incident where a blip appeared on the radar in the Air Force uh, at the Air Force Station in Madison, Wisconsin, and it was flying over the Great Lakes, and they had no idea what it was, so they scrambled a fighter jet, to go intercept it. And these two men were in the fighter jet, and they flew up to intercept this thing, and they watched the fighter jet on the radar approach this blip, and it merged with the blip, and then it vanished, and they never found they never found anything at all. So they scrambled a second jet, and that one disappeared too. So I worked this session, and I remember encountering something. I had no idea what it was, but and at that point in my life, I really wasn't. Do aliens exist? Are there ETs? What are UFOs really? I never even thought about that kind of stuff. I just sort of would put that in a box and put it on the shelf so I didn't have to look at it. And suddenly here I was face to face with something. And now I look back and I think I could have easily been face to face with a pilot back in, because this event happened in the 50s. And back then I think pilots wore rubber things on their faces, and they kind of had these masks with oxygen and things. And so it could have been a pilot with a thing on his face for all I know. But um, I, but I remember calling Lyn and saying, Lyn, what I'm viewing right now is pushing the boundaries of my belief system. And Lyn laughed just like he did just there. So you saw him laugh. He laughed and he said, yeah, remote viewing will do that. But then you said something very profound that helped me immensely. You said, Lori, if God is able to be the God of the planet Earth, and mankind, why wouldn't he be the God of the entire universe and all the planets and all the beings and all that? Why would you have a problem with that? And I thought, that makes a lot of sense. And that was my first experience with my God box kind of getting blown open. And it didn't get blown apart. It just got much bigger. I suddenly realized that God became much bigger in my mind, and the universe, the whole loving orchestration of our lives through the universe, and how even things that seem unacceptable or really hard are part of that love, because in the way that it causes us to grow, and that our lives right here are actually very, very brief. And we're just kind of in the school, this school of life.
Yeah, our lives are very brief, but also we, in our belief, in our religion, we limit God, and we say, God is this, God is that, and he fits into this box. I I would expect somebody to say, and his birth sign is, but um, the thing is, we limit God in our beliefs, and we never realize how limitless God is.
That is so true. I feel like Kinross blew that God box open, and the kidnapping session, when I connected with that guard so thoroughly that I even really suddenly almost felt like for a few moments that I was embracing that kidnapping organization's ideology. Like, we have to kidnap these people to support our, to get the money to fund our cause, and it was like, oh, amen, yes, we do. Yeah, but that showed me how we are all connected in some way, because I couldn't have possibly thought that even for a moment unless I really connected with that. And then when I viewed Sasquatch for Coast to Coast AM, And this was a case where I started the session instantly. I thought, oh no, it's going to be Sasquatch. It's going to be Bigfoot. So I looked at Jim and I said, I suddenly have this thought that the target's going to be Bigfoot. Just tell me that it's not Bigfoot, so I can just set that aside. He just looks at me and says, go for the unknown. And so I'm like, okay. But when I viewed that target, I didn't even believe in Bigfoot, to be honest. I didn't believe in Bigfoot. I didn't, Sasquatch, all that. And as I've said many times, my only experience up to that point was Harry and the Hendersons movie. And so I had an amazingly profound experience in that session that was so deep and loving and amazing. And I realized that life is definitely not what we think it is. That life is full of, and reality is full of things we can't even imagine. So and after that, we actually had some encounters with Bigfoot here because we live right on the edge of the national forest. And so it was sort of like, oh, you don't believe in me? Well, let me show up and prove myself to you. And so we had some pretty amazing experiences and so that really showed me, that altered my perception of reality even further. And Lyn, I think you'd agree with me when you say this, there's no ceiling to this. There's no point at which you don't have an experience that makes you go, wow. We just keep getting deeper and deeper and more amazing. And
yeah. And the thing is, in our daily life, we limit our minds too. And it's not only that reality is so much more than we ever thought, the fact that we can experience so much more is something that people just never realize. But you can experience moving through time. You can experience moving, being another place in space. I was given a target one time and I found nothing but sand and a scoop sticking up out of the sand. And that's all I could get. So that's what I reported. 17 years later, the person who tasked me that, I never got feedback on it until 17 years later, sent me a picture that the Mars rover had taken of this one place, and there's that scoop sticking up out of the sand. And and I didn't know, I had forgotten all about it, but I went 17 years. Well, if I viewed my feedback, I went 17 years through time and all that distance in space with my mind. And you can do that. And this is one of the things that people don't realize is that with our abilities, with our mind's abilities, we can see across time and the universe as easily as we can look across a room. You just have to learn how to do it. Yeah.
My very first basic class, which I took at the Drury Inn in San Antonio, Texas, in April of 1997. That very first day of the very first class, Lyn held up an envelope, and he's just introducing concepts to everybody in the very beginning of the class. And he holds up an envelope and says, does anybody want to take a guess at what's in this envelope? And this man raises his hand and he says, I think there's mountains and flowers and trees and blue sky. And so Lyn says, okay, open the envelope. And the guy pulls out a picture that was glued onto the paper from a magazine. And it was a photograph of the inside of a factory. It was 100% man-made. And so Lyn just kept teaching. And I think you were teaching about nouns or something. Anyway, he goes back to teaching. He has his back to the class because he's writing on a whiteboard. And then he turns around and the guy is holding the piece of paper up to the light, trying to, he's like going like this. And Lyn says, what are you doing? And the guy says, well, I'm trying to see what's on the glued down side of the paper, because it was a cutout from a magazine. So it was a two-sided thing. And Lyn says, and what is on the glued down side of the paper? And the guy says, mountains and trees and flowers and everything I said. And Lyn said, well, you just ruined your session. And at that moment, it hit me that time wasn't what I thought it was. That time was being introduced to me from that one sentence in a way that I'd never thought of time before. I just always thought of time as being kind of consecutive, 1 minute after the next. And I don't think I heard the rest of the class because I was gone for the rest of the class mentally because all I could think about was like, oh my gosh. And then Lyn went on to and proceeded to teach about time loops and how the guy moved forward to that moment of sort of cheating and holding it up, and then fed that information back through himself through time. And I was just like, oh my gosh, now it's pretty common for me. But at that point, that was a huge aha moment. And I think, that was just the first of bazillions of aha moments I've had since then.
The neat thing is that you can do that with the lottery numbers and roulette wheels and all of that as well, if you learn how to do that.
Yeah, that was a class I just finished teaching this last weekend, was the associative remote viewing class, where you learn how to do that. And in that class, we correctly predicted the winner of a college basketball game between the Wisconsin Badgers and Penn State. And we predicted that Penn State would win, and Penn State was slotted to lose by 4 points to Wisconsin. And Penn State had not been able to beat Wisconsin in 10 years. And Penn State won 81-71. And then also we did a thing for the scratch offs, and 8 people went out, did this little test, went out to buy the scratch offs, and 6 of them won. One person won 140, 2 people won 50. Somebody won 42, another person won 40, and the other people won like $5, $10, but it was really a fun class. And we did a lot of other stuff. We played roulette and we did things with cards and things, but it was, you could just see people just getting their minds blown right and left. And they were posting emojis of the mind getting blown and stuff. It was pretty funny. No, Elena, I don't think we're rich by now. You know what? It's because Lyn and I both have this one thing, in that money has never been a big motivator for us. And so we get really caught up in the CRV and the potential for CRV for doing amazing things and really making a difference in the world. And we both just kind of forget about ARV sometimes, except for when we're teaching it. At least I think that's how you feel too.
I went out to get groceries yesterday morning at 5:30 in the morning so that there wouldn't be a COVID crowd there. And I had to stop at a filling station to get gas. And all of a sudden, I remembered what you told me about the lottery tickets, and I knew that if I went in and bought a scratch off, I would win money. And it was cold, so I got in the car and went to the store. Coming back, I went past the gas station again, and the wheel almost turned by itself. I knew that I could go buy a ticket and win money, and I knew it 100%, and I drove on home. Yeah, it just, it would have been good as an experiment, but the money wouldn't have mattered. Yeah.
Bethany says, "Oh, you're no fun." Oh, guys. Okay. Well, we have reached the end of our hour, so we're going to go ahead and end it here. It's always good to end on a high. Lyn has always said, end on a high. And, but we are going to be doing this again, and we will have another Q&A. We just wanted to do something a little bit different this time, because the Q&As get kind of wild sometimes. We're trying to answer all the questions and make sure we get everybody in, and it can be kind of hectic. So I thought it would be fun this time just to have a conversation about sessions, and I just enjoy so much being with Lyn. Lyn was here at our home for just a little over a week ago, I think, maybe a couple weeks ago, was it? Yeah, and got to stay the whole day, and we had just such a fun, amazing time together for 8 hours, just hanging out and enjoying being together. It was so much fun. So we just love it. Guys, thank you so mumuch for joining us. This was wonderful. Again, we'll be posting these in various places. And so, and we'll make sure that you have access to it. Again, Mary's posting the link to Lyn's book right there. Hey, Mary, can you post Lyn's website there, crviewer.com? and my website, intuitivespecialist.com, for anybody that wants those, wants to join in and check us out. Lyn and I both have 6-week courses in basic CRV. Lyn has an ARV course. For those of you who are just listening to this about associative remote viewing and the lottery and stuff, Lyn offers a video course in ARV, and we have and there's a calendar for live 3-day workshops as well. So Lyn and I work together. We don't even think of each other as competitors at all. We love the model of sharing and supporting each other. So jump in there and just dive into our websites. There's tons of free stuff on both websites. Lyn has wonderful free targets. I have some free targets. Mine aren't so wonderful. We're gonna be adding to those, but Lyn's mine are really good if you're a basic student. The targets on my website, but the ones on Lyn's site are for all levels. And Lyn just has some great stuff on his website, and I have a bunch of free stuff on mine, including a free ideogram practice. There's an ideogram class on mine for free, and so there's a lot of free stuff there that you could dive into if you haven't yet ever taken a class in remote viewing. There's just tons of free stuff on both Lyn's site and my site. crviewer.com, intuitivespecialists.com. Those are the 2 resources for you. Thanks so much, everybody. We love you. Lyn, do you want to say anything before we go?
Well, thanks for having me on here. And I always enjoy these talks with you, and love being at your home. It is the most beautiful earth ship I've ever seen, and it's fantastic. So yeah, thank you for having me there too. And yeah, I enjoyed this, and I hope people get something out of it too.
Oh yeah, I hope so too. Everybody's expressing. Sorry, everybody's expressing how much they're enjoying this. And thank you, Lyn, for your time, and thank everybody for being here with us. We sure appreciate it. Bethany's saying thanks for your service to our nation, Lyn. Love you guys. Okay, we'll see you soon.